Humanity's dark matter warships, shockwaves rip through the Galactic Council. The Great Hall of Conclave Prime was never quiet. It was a place built for noise, for argument, for politics, for the loud clash of 100 different species, all trying to pull the galaxy in their own direction. The hall stretched nearly a full kilometer from one end to the other, and its curved walls were lined with the banners and seals of every member species in the Galactic Council. Lights of every color buzzed and shifted overhead. Translators clicked and hummed as dozens of alien voices talked over each other. It was, by every measure, the most powerful room in the known galaxy. And today, it was being used to decide the fate of humanity. Ambassador Vetharak of the Dominari stood at the central podium. He was tall, even for his species, nearly 3 meters of dark-scaled muscle, with a long jaw and eyes the color of old amber. His voice was deep and smooth, the kind of voice that made other species feel calm, even when his words were anything but. The Soul Exclusion Zone has been silent for 63 standard years, he said, his translated words rolling through the hall like slow thunder. Humanity has made no contact. They have sent no ships beyond their borders. They have answered no diplomatic signals. We have been patient. We have been generous. But patience has limits, and the Council's generosity cannot go on forever. He paused, letting the silence do its work. The Sol system and its surrounding territories hold resources that the Council needs. 17 mineral-rich moons, 3 habitable secondary planets, a star with energy output that could power a dozen colony grids. These resources are being wasted, locked behind an embargo that was meant to protect the galaxy from human aggression, not to gift them a private empire. Murmurs moved through the chamber like a wave. Vetharak pressed forward. I am formally proposing Resolution 7 Gamma, the resolution of absorption. Human space will be integrated into Council territory. The human population will be offered protected status under Dominari administrative oversight. They will be cared for. They will be fed. They will simply no longer be independent. The murmurs turned into noise. Some species cheered. Some grumbled. A cluster of Yetharani delegates, small bird-like creatures with quick eyes, leaned together and whispered rapidly among themselves. The Borvac representatives, massive gray-skinned beings who valued order above all else, gave slow, approving nods. It moved quickly, the way votes always moved when powerful species had already made up their minds behind closed doors. One by one, the tallies came in. 34 in favor, 9 opposed, 2 abstentions. The resolution passed. Only one species had abstained rather than voted, the Luminari. They were small beings, insectoid, with large pale eyes and delicate limbs. They rarely spoke in full council sessions, preferring quiet diplomacy in private chambers. But today, their elder, a creature so old her shell had turned from gold to white, rose slowly from her seat. The room gave her a moment of surprised quiet. We abstain, she said, her voice soft and clicking through the translator, because we are not comfortable with this decision. Humanity has been silent for a long time. But we should ask ourselves, why are they silent? Not because they are gone, not because they are weak. She turned her pale eyes slowly across the chamber. We have not heard from them. That is not silence. That is preparation. No one responded. The moment passed. The vote stood. Vetharak barely glanced at her. He was already moving on to the logistics. Which fleet would lead the first annexation convoy? What timeline the Dominari preferred? How the human population transfer would be managed? The Luminari elder sat back down. She folded her thin hands together and said nothing more. But her eyes stayed open, and they were watching the stars through the great transparent wall of the chamber, as though she expected to see something there. 3 days later, The 14th Patrol Fleet of the Galactic Council was dispatched to the edge of the Sol Exclusion Zone. It was not a war fleet. It was an escort fleet, 40 ships strong, built for presence rather than combat. Their orders were simple: enter human space, establish a communication post, and signal the annexation convoy that the path was clear. Fleet Commander Oren Sesek of the Yethrani ran a clean operation. His ships moved in tight formation, their sensors active, their logs running. He had done this kind of mission before, moving into a quiet space and planting a flag. There was nothing to worry about. Humanity was silent. Humanity was finished. Everyone agreed on that. The fleet crossed the boundary marker at 0600 hours, standard galactic time. Their last recorded sensor ping was at 0601 hours. After that, nothing. No distress signal, no explosion, no debris field, no energy readings, no bodies, no wreckage, nothing that a battle leaves behind, and nothing that an accident leaves behind either. 40 ships and their crews simply ceased to appear on any sensor in the galaxy. The Council's reaction was not panic, not at first. Ships went missing sometimes. Navigation errors happened. The initial response was measured. Another scout was sent to investigate. It also vanished. Then a third, smaller ship, just a 2-person observation vessel, was sent to the edge of the zone with orders only to scan, not to cross. It crossed anyway, or rather, something pulled it across. The crew of that small vessel, a pair of Borvac scouts, named Gorath and Hessen, were recovered 6 days later by a passing trade ship. They were found floating in an escape pod 40 light-years from where they had started, in perfectly fine health, with no memory of what had happened after they hit the boundary. Their ship's computer logs showed a gap of exactly 9 hours. 9 hours of blank recording, as though the ship's entire sensor suite had simply turned off. Gorath told the recovery team that the last thing he remembered was a feeling, not a sight, not a sound, just a feeling, like the universe had taken a breath and held it. Hessen said nothing at all. He stared at his hands for a long time when they asked him. Then he said, very quietly, "There was something out there, in the dark. It was very big, and it was looking at us." The Council emergency session was called within 12 hours. The Grand Hall of Conclave Prime, which had been so loud 3 days ago when the fate of humanity was decided with a comfortable vote and self-satisfied murmurs, was now a very different place. It was almost completely silent. Vetharak stood at the central podium again, but he did not look smooth or calm this time. His amber eyes were moving too quickly, scanning the room, scanning the data feeds on the screens around him. His jaw was tight. "We need answers," he said. And somewhere in the dark, beyond the edge of known Council space, in the vast quiet of the Sol Exclusion Zone, something that had no heat signature, no radiation output, and no gravitational profile, slowly turned in the void. It had been watching for a long time. It was very patient. Humanity's dark matter warships, shockwaves, ripped through the Galactic Council. Sarah Voss had not slept in 4 days. This was not unusual for her species. The Kalenti were amphibious beings, soft-skinned and large-eyed, built for the cold and the dark of deep-water worlds. They did not need sleep the way warm-blooded species did. But even for a Kalenti, 4 days of non-stop work left its marks. Her skin had gone pale at the edges. Her fingers trembled slightly when she reached for her data tablet. Her eyes, which were normally sharp and still, kept drifting to the corner of the screen where the numbers refused to make sense. She was the best intelligence analyst the Galactic Council had ever trained. She had cracked pirate codes, predicted fleet movements, mapped smuggling routes through dead star systems. Not once in 30 years of service. But this was different. She sat alone in her assigned analysis room deep inside Conclave Prime's intelligence division, surrounded by screens full of data from the 14th Patrol Fleet's final recorded moments. She had gone through every piece of it dozens of times. Sensor logs, communication records, navigation data, the faint ghost readings from the 2 Borvac scouts. She had run models. She had built simulations. She had called in 3 separate specialist teams and listened to all of their theories. None of it held together. Because the data was not showing her a battle. It was not showing her an ambush, or a weapon discharge, or a gravitational anomaly. It was showing her something she had no proper word for. The patrol fleet had not been destroyed. It had not fled. According to everything the sensors could measure, the 40 ships had simply stopped being where they were. No energy spike before the disappearance. No radiation bloom. No shockwave. No debris. Nothing that any known weapon or natural force produced. Sarah Voss pulled up the raw data one more time and stared at it. And then, because she was very good at her job and very tired, she stopped looking at what was there and started looking at what was not there. What was not there was the problem. Every ship and every single vessel that had ever moved through space left traces. Heat from its engines, a faint gravitational ripple from its mass, radiation bleed from its power core. Even a drifting, dead, powerless ship left a signature. The universe did not allow things to simply exist without touching the space around them. But the readings from the moment the fleet vanished showed a complete and total absence of all of that. Not a reduction, not a fading. An absence, as though something had reached into that region of space and carefully removed every physical trace of 40 ships at the same exact moment. That was not a weapon. That was not a natural event. That was engineering. She filed her preliminary report with the Council's High Intelligence Office within the hour. The response came back fast, faster than usual, which told her the people at the top were frightened. They gave her full access to the deep archives. Every piece of recorded data about humanity that the Council had collected since first contact, 300 years ago. All of it. Unrestricted. She started reading. Most of it was old. Early contact records, behavioral assessments, the political arguments that had eventually led to the Veil embargo 200 years ago. The Council had been afraid of humanity for a long time. That much was clear in every document. Humans were unpredictable, the old report said, emotional, prone to conflict. Their history was full of wars fought over small pieces of land, over ideas, over things that other species found completely irrational. The Council had looked at humanity's past and decided that the safest thing to do was to keep them locked away behind a boundary and wait for them to either grow up or burn out. What the Council had not considered, what no one had seriously considered, was what humanity would do with 200 years of isolation, and a very good reason to be angry. Sarah Voss found the first clue in a trade record from 170 years ago. A human science vessel had been caught trying to move unusual equipment through a neutral trade post, equipment designed for particle isolation at subatomic levels. The ship had been turned away. The equipment had been confiscated. The humans had protested and then gone quiet. She found the second clue in a Border Patrol report from 140 years ago. A Council sensor station near the edge of the Sol Zone had picked up an energy reading that the stationed crew had marked as equipment malfunction. The reading lasted 3 seconds and then vanished. The crew had filed it and forgotten about it. Sarah Voss did not forget about it. She ran the reading through every analysis tool she had. It took 6 hours. When the result came back, she sat very still for a long time. The energy signature was consistent with dark matter interaction. Not dark matter observation, not the passive detection that Council science had been working on for centuries. Interaction. Something had reached out and touched dark matter the way a hand touches water. 140 years ago. The clues were everywhere once she knew what to look for. Scattered through decades of reports that had been filed by border crews who didn't know what they were seeing. Dismissed by analysts who hadn't been looking for the right thing. Humans had been working on something enormous, something quiet, something they had kept hidden so carefully that the Council's entire intelligence apparatus had walked right past it for over a century. The project had a name. She found it in a fragment of an intercepted human communication from 80 years ago, a single line that had been flagged as low priority because no one understood the reference. The line read, "Erebus testing complete. Phase 4 authorized." Seravos looked up Erebus in the old human language database. It was a word from one of humanity's ancient mythologies. It meant the deep darkness, the place beyond the edge of the world where light did not reach. She felt something cold move through her. She pulled every thread she could find on Erebus. Most of it was gaps. The humans had been meticulous about keeping their secrets. But enough fragments existed to build a shape. And the shape was terrifying. Erebus was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a propulsion and displacement system built around dark matter manipulation. Ships equipped with Erebus did not travel through space the way normal ships did. They folded it. They moved through the dark matter that threaded all of known space, the invisible web that connected every star and every void, and they used it the way a fish uses water. Effortlessly, invisibly. A ship running Erebus was undetectable by any sensor the Council possessed. It produced no heat, no radiation, no gravitational signature. It existed in normal space and outside of it at the same time, ghosting through reality like a thought, present but untouchable. And the patrol fleet had not been destroyed. Her models confirmed it now. The ships had been displaced, physically moved through the dark matter web and dropped somewhere far away. Unharmed, untouched, just relocated, the way someone might pick up a piece from a game board and set it down somewhere less inconvenient. Seravos stared at her final report for a long time before she sent it. The Council had voted to absorb humanity because they believed humans had gone quiet and weak. The truth was something else entirely. While the galaxy had been talking about them, watching them, pitying them, and eventually dismissing them, humanity had spent 200 years in the dark, building something no one else had ever imagined. And whatever they had built, it worked. Then, she sat back in her chair, looked up at the ceiling of her small cold room, and thought about the Luminari Elder's words from the Council session. That is not silence. That is preparation. She had been right. She had been completely, terrifyingly right. Humanity's dark matter warships. Shockwaves rip through the Galactic Council. The security alarms at Conclave Prime had not gone off in 61 years. The last time they had triggered was a minor incident, a smuggler's ship that had drifted too close to the station's outer defense ring by accident. That had caused 12 minutes of noise and paperwork and nothing more. The alarms were mostly decorative at this point, everyone agreed. Conclave Prime sat at the center of the most heavily defended region of space in the galaxy. 14 patrol fleets rotated around it at all times. Sensor arrays stretched across 3 full star systems in every direction. Nothing could get close without being seen, tracked, and stopped, long before it became a problem. That was what everyone believed. At 0400 hours, station time, every single alarm on Conclave Prime went off at once. Not just the outer ring alarms. Not just the proximity alerts. Security doors slammed shut across the entire station. Emergency lights flooded every corridor in red. The automated defense guns on the outer hull spun up and began scanning in all directions, looking for a target. They found nothing, because there was nothing on the sensors. The sensors showed empty space. But empty space does not make the station shake. The tremor was not violent. It was more like a deep, low vibration, the kind that moves through your bones before it reaches your ears. Every being on Conclave Prime felt it at the same moment. It traveled through the walls and the floors and the ceilings, and it lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then it stopped. And then the ESV Nyx Ascendant was simply there. It had not approached. It had not decelerated from a distance. One moment, the air security ring of Conclave Prime held nothing but the station and its own defense platforms. The next moment, a ship 4 kilometers long was sitting in the middle of it, perfectly still, as though it had always been there, and the rest of the universe had only just caught up. The defense platforms reacted immediately, guns swinging toward the massive vessel, targeting systems locking on. Warnings were broadcast on every channel. The station's military commander, a stone-faced Borvac general named Urath, was shouting orders from the security center before he was fully awake. Intercept ships were scrambled. Shields went to full power. None of it mattered. The Nyx Ascendant did not move. It did not charge weapons. It did not raise shields of its own. Or if it did, they were invisible like the rest of it. It simply sat there, huge and dark and perfectly calm, like a mountain that had decided to take a visit. Its hull was black, not painted black, but a deep, absolute darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it. There were no glowing engine ports, no running lights, no visible weapon arrays. The ship looked almost simple from the outside, built in long, clean lines, without the decorative flourishes that most Council warships carried. It looked like something built by people who did not care how frightening it appeared, because they did not need to try to be frightening. And then it opened a communication channel. The signal reached every screen and speaker in Conclave Prime at once. Not through the standard communication network, but directly, cutting through the station's systems as easily as light cuts through water. In the Grand Hall, where a dozen council representatives had been dragged out of sleep for an emergency session, every screen on every wall lit up at the same time. The woman on the screen was not what any of them had expected. Admiral Kira Vasquez was not a large person. She was of average human height, with dark hair pulled back from a face that was calm and completely still. She wore a plain black uniform with no decoration except a small silver pin on her collar. She looked like someone who had been awake for hours and had used every one of those hours to think carefully about exactly what she was going to say. She looked more than anything like someone who was not afraid. "My name is Admiral Kira Vasquez of the United Sol Star Command," she said. Her voice was quiet. She did not raise it. She did not need to. "I am speaking to the full assembly of the Galactic Council. I know you can hear me. I know your weapons are pointed at my ship. That is fine. I would like to speak to you for a few minutes. After that, you can decide what you want to do." 200 alien beings, many of them still in the process of arriving and finding their seats, stared at the screens. Vasquez continued, "3 weeks ago, your council voted to absorb human space into council territory. You decided, without speaking to us, without asking us, and without any right to do so, that our home was now your property, and our people were now your subjects. You sent a fleet to begin that process." She paused for a single breath. "We moved that fleet somewhere it could not bother us. No one was harmed. We wanted you to have time to think." Vethorak rose from his seat. His voice came out loud and sharp. "You are in violation of 17 council statutes. You are operating a vessel inside restricted space. Stand down immediately, or we will open fire." Vasquez looked at him the way someone looks at a word they have already read too many times. "Ambassador Vethorak, you can open fire if you choose. I want to show you something first." She touched something outside the frame of the camera. Every screen in the hall shifted, splitting into 12 separate feeds. 12 different locations across the galaxy. each one showing a feed from a different place. Vetharok recognized the first one immediately. It was his homeworld, the Dominari capital planet, seen from orbit. And sitting in that orbit, dark and still and completely unannounced, was another ship, exactly like the Nyx Ascendant. The other 11 feeds showed other worlds: the Ythrani home system, the Borvac central planet, the Kalenti ocean world. 11 of the 12 most powerful species in the Council, each with a dark human warship sitting quietly in orbit above their most important planet. Weapons cold, no aggression, just present. The hall erupted. Voices shouted in a dozen languages. Several delegates were on their feet. The Ythrani ambassadors were clutching each other. One of the Borvac representatives stood perfectly still, with his massive hands flat on the table in front of him, which was the Borvac way of showing that something had frightened them badly. Vasquez waited. She let the noise go on for nearly a full minute. Then she spoke again, and her quiet voice somehow cut through all of it. "We are not here to start a war," she said. "We are not here to threaten your families or your people. Those ships will not fire unless fired upon. I want to be very clear about that." She looked directly into the camera, and every being in that hall felt as though she was looking directly at them. "We are here because you made a decision about our home without our permission. We came to explain why that was a mistake." She folded her hands on the desk in front of her. "For 200 years, you put a wall around us and told yourselves we were contained. You watched us and decided we were quiet because we were weak. You stopped paying attention. And while you were not paying attention, we were working." She let that sit for a moment. "We would like to talk now. A real conversation. Not a vote taken without us in the room. Not a resolution passed by people who think we no longer matter." Her eyes were steady. "We matter. We have always mattered, and we are ready for the galaxy to understand that." Vetharok stared at the screen. His smooth, practiced calm was gone. His amber eyes were hard, and his jaw was tight. And for the first time in a very long career, he had absolutely nothing to say. In the back of the hall, the Luminari elder sat quietly, with her pale eyes half closed. She did not look surprised. She did not look frightened. She looked, almost, like she was relieved. Humanity's dark matter warships, shockwaves ripped through the Galactic Council. The neutral station was called Midpoint. It sat between 3 different star systems and belonged to none of them. A small, old place, built a long time ago for exactly this kind of meeting. Its halls were narrow, and its lights were dim, and its walls carried the scratches and marks of hundreds of years of hard use. It was not a grand place. It was not meant to be. It was meant to be a place where beings who did not fully trust each other could sit in the same room without feeling like the other side had the advantage. The Council had suggested it. Humanity had agreed without argument. That small fact, that humanity had agreed without argument, made several Council members more nervous than the warships had. Secretary General Amara Osei arrived first. She came with a small team of 4 people and no visible security. She was a tall woman with close-cut gray hair and dark, careful eyes that missed very little. She moved through the station corridors at an easy pace, speaking quietly with her team, pausing once to look out a small viewport at the stars. She did not look like someone preparing for the most important negotiation in 3 centuries. She looked like someone who had already done her worrying and had come out the other side of it. Admiral Vasquez walked beside her. She had not changed from the same plain black uniform she had worn during the broadcast. She carried nothing in her hands. The Council's delegation arrived 20 minutes later. It was a much larger group, 9 members, each representing a powerful species, each attended by aides and advisors. They filled the station's main meeting room quickly, arranging themselves on one side of the long central table, with the careful precision of people who had spent their lives making sure they looked more powerful than whoever was across from them. Osei sat down across from them, folded her hands on the table, and waited. The council's lead negotiator was a Yethrani named Essek, a sharp, quick-minded being with feathers the color of rust and eyes that moved fast and constantly. Essek had negotiated 43 major treaties in her career. She was considered the best in the council. She opened calmly, with practiced confidence. "We are pleased that humanity is willing to engage in dialogue," she said. "We believe there is a path forward that serves everyone. The resolution of absorption was passed with good intentions and can be reviewed, adjusted, perhaps. There is room to discuss terms of integration that respect human culture, while also, I would like to show you something before we begin," Osei said. Her voice was polite. She did not raise it or cut Essek off rudely. She simply spoke, and something in the way she spoke made Essek stop. Osei placed a single data chip on the table and pressed it flat with one finger. The room's display system came alive. Numbers and documents and records filled the air above the table, in a long, dense column of information that seemed to go on and on as it scrolled slowly upward. "This is the embargo ledger," Osei said. "My people have been compiling it for 80 years. It contains every recorded consequence of the Vale embargo on the human population, every resource restriction, every blocked trade agreement, every piece of technology that was denied to us by council policy, every food shortage that resulted from those restrictions, every medical supply that was turned away at the embargo line." She paused. "Every person who died because of those things." The room was very quiet. "The number at the bottom," Osei continued, "is the total human death count directly attributable to council embargo policy over 200 years. I will not read it aloud, but I encourage everyone in this room to look at it carefully before we continue." Several members of the council delegation looked. Several of them looked away again quickly. One of the Borvac representatives, a broad, gray-skinned elder named Torak, kept his eyes on the number for a long time and did not look away. Essek regained her footing quickly. She was very good at her job. "These are historical matters," she said carefully. "Complex situations, many of which occurred under different council leadership. We cannot be held responsible for decisions made." "You can," Osei said simply. "You are an institution. Institutions carry responsibility across generations. That is what it means to be an institution." She tilted her head slightly. "If you were not responsible for the past, you would also not be able to claim credit for the treaties, the borders, and the trade agreements that benefited your members over those same 200 years. You cannot take the benefits and refuse the responsibility. That is not how it works." Essek opened her mouth and closed it again. Vetharak, seated at the far end of the council side, leaned forward. His voice was harder than Essek's and less careful. "You are sitting across from the representatives of species who could still reduce your home system to dust. But impressive ships are not the same as an army. And one species, no matter how creative, cannot stand against the full military weight of the council." Vasquez, who had said nothing since sitting down, looked at him. "Ambassador," she said, "last Tuesday one of our ships spent 6 hours inside your military headquarters station on Dominari Prime. It mapped every corridor. It copied every strategic database. It sat in your command center for 40 minutes. She held his gaze. "No one saw it. No alarm went off. Your security did not know it was there." She let that sit for a moment. "We left because we wanted to. If you want to discuss military options, I am happy to have that conversation. But I think you should finish reading the ledger first." His amber eyes were very still. The negotiation went on for 3 days. Every time the council delegation tried to redirect, delay, or find a crack between Osei and Vasquez, they found nothing. The two women worked together without friction, without visible effort, like two parts of the same machine. Ose carried the moral and political weight. Vasquez carried the unspoken reminder of what sat in orbit above 12 council homeworlds. On the second day, something unexpected happened. Torak, the old Borvak elder who had stared at the ledger's final number without looking away, asked to speak privately with Ose. He met her in a small side room. He sat across from her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "My own people experienced something like this. Long ago, before the council, we were contained too, by a species that no longer exists." He paused. "I want you to know that I voted against the resolution. I want you to know that the number in that ledger will not leave me." Ose looked at him for a long moment. "Then help us make sure it never has to be compiled again," she said. Torak gave a single slow nod and went back to his seat. On the third day, something else happened. Something that shifted the balance of the room in a way that no warship could have. The Luminari Elder arrived. She had not been part of the official delegation. She had traveled to Midpoint alone, which was unusual for someone of her age and her rank. She walked into the meeting room slowly, and every eye in the place turned to her. She looked around the table, and then she said, in her soft, clicking voice, "I have something to tell this room. I have been waiting a long time to say it." She told them everything, that the Luminari had quietly, carefully, and secretly passed dark matter research data to human scientists for over 100 years. Small pieces at a time, fragments buried in routine communication signals, hidden in the noise of ordinary transmissions. Not enough to be traced, just enough to help. The silence that followed was very long. Essex stared at the old insectoid elder with something close to disbelief. "You helped them. You helped them build those ships." "We helped them survive," the elder said quietly. "There is a difference. We could not stop the embargo. We were too small, and we would have been crushed if we had spoken openly. So we did what we could, quietly, for a very long time." She turned her pale eyes to Ose. "I am glad it was enough." Ose reached across the small space between them and placed her hand gently over the elder's thin ones. The political shift in the room after that was like a tide changing direction. The Luminari were small, but they were very old, and they were trusted, genuinely trusted, by more council species than almost anyone. Their public act of solidarity with humanity changed the calculation for every uncertain delegation in the room. One by one, across the rest of that third day, the council members stopped arguing about whether to give humanity what it asked for, and started asking how quickly it could be arranged. By the time the meeting closed, Amara Ose had everything on her list, every single item. She walked back through the narrow corridor of Midpoint Station toward the docking bay. And for just a moment she stopped at the same small viewport Vasquez had noticed on the way in. She looked out at the stars. She thought about the number at the bottom of the embargo ledger. She thought about all the names behind that number, people she had never met, lives lived and ended in the shadow of a wall that should never have been built. Then she straightened her jacket, turned away from the viewport, and went to make sure the paperwork was done correctly. There was still work to do. Humanity's dark matter warships, shockwaves ripped through the Galactic Council. The signing ceremony was not grand. There had been talk, early on, of holding it in the main hall of Conclave Prime, of making it a large and formal event, with full delegations and broadcast feeds and speeches that would be remembered for generations. Several council members had pushed hard for that. They wanted the cameras. They wanted the moment to look, from the outside, like a peaceful and voluntary agreement between equals who had simply needed time to find common ground. Secretary General Amara Ose had declined politely but completely. She had chosen instead a smaller room in a newer wing of Conclave Prime, a plain, clean space with white walls and a single long table and enough chairs for the people who actually needed to be there. No extra cameras, No decorative banners, no speeches prepared in advance. Just the documents, the people, and the act of signing. The documents were called the Conclave Reformation Accords. They were 41 pages long and covered everything. The Veil embargo was formally dissolved, declared unlawful, and struck from the record of legal council acts. Human space was recognized as fully sovereign territory, with the same rights and protections afforded to every other member species. The Sol system and all surrounding human-settled worlds were removed from any council jurisdictional claim, permanently, and without condition. Humanity was granted a permanent seat in the High Chamber, not a junior seat, not a provisional seat, but a full founding tier seat equal to the most powerful species in the room. And on page 37, a single paragraph established something that had never existed before in the history of the Galactic Council, a permanent, independent body with the authority to investigate and prosecute any council member, official, or government for crimes committed against other species through council policy. It had no sunset clause. It did not expire. It would continue to operate as long as the council itself operated. The first case on its docket had already been filed. 3 Dominaria officials, the architects of the original embargo legislation 2 centuries ago, now very old and very quiet, were named as defendants. Supporting documents ran to over 400 pages. Vetharak was not among them. He was too young to have built the embargo, but he sat in the room for the signing as required by his position, and he did not look like himself. The smooth confidence was gone. He sat straight and still and said nothing, and his amber eyes stayed on the table in front of him for most of the morning. When it was over, when the last signature was placed and the documents were sealed, Osei stood and looked around the room. She did not make a speech. She simply said, "Thank you," and meant it in the complicated way that people mean things when they are grateful and exhausted, and still carrying something heavy, even after the hardest part is finished. Outside the room, in the corridor, Vetharak was waiting. This surprised her. She had not expected him to seek her out. She stopped walking when she saw him, and her team slowed behind her, alert. He held up one hand, not a threat, just a gesture that said he only wanted a moment. Osei nodded to her team and stepped toward him. Vetharak was quiet for a few seconds. Up close, without the podium and the grand hall and the political theater around him, he looked older, and she remembered. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I want to ask you something," he said. His voice was low. "Your ships, all 12 of them, they were above our worlds for 3 weeks. Weapons cold. No demands. No aggression. You could have done anything." He paused. "Why didn't you?" Osei looked at him for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and even and completely serious. "Because we remember what it felt like to be powerless," she said. "We spent 200 years on the other side of a wall that your council built around us. We know what it feels like to have someone else decide that your life, your home, and your future are their property to manage." She held his gaze. "We have no interest in making the rest of the galaxy feel that way. We have every interest in making sure it never happens to anyone else again." Vetharak was silent for a long time. Then he gave a single slow nod, not the practiced political nod of a diplomat, but something smaller and more honest, and walked away down the corridor. Osei watched him go. Then she turned and continued toward the docking bay. 3 weeks after the signing, the Galactic Justice Tribunal held its first public session. The 3 Dominaria officials sat at a plain table in a plain room and heard the charges read aloud. The reading took 4 hours. The room was full for every minute of it. Representatives from dozens of species attended. Many of them had their own old grievances with the council, smaller injustices, quieter ones, the kind that had never had a venue before. They sat and they listened, and they understood, for the first time, that the rules had changed, that someone could now be held accountable, that the machinery of justice, which had always belonged only to the powerful, had been rewired. It would take years for the tribunal to finish its work. Osi knew that. She was not impatient. Her people had waited 200 years. They could wait a little longer to do it right. The Erebus fleet did not stand down. This was a point of ongoing discomfort for several council species, who had hoped, quietly, carefully, in private conversations, that once the accords were signed, humanity would bring its dark ships home and power them down. When Vasquez was asked about this at a formal council security session, she answered without hesitation. "The Erebus fleet will continue its patrol pattern indefinitely," she said, "not as a threat, as a deterrent. The galaxy is safer when everyone knows that aggression against any sovereign people carries real consequences." She let that sit. That includes aggression against humanity. It also includes aggression against anyone else. Two smaller species, the Volari and the Mech, had quietly approached the human delegation during the midpoint negotiations with their own old grievances against council members. Osi had listened to both of them carefully, and had included specific protective language for both species in the accords. Neither of them had asked to be included. She had simply done it because it was the right thing to do. The Volari elder had wept when he saw his people's name in the final document. He had not expected it. He had not known how to ask for it. He had lived his whole life in a galaxy where small species learned not to ask for things they did not believe they could get. He was still learning that the rules had changed. The last public event of that long month was the formal elevation of the Luminari to co-founding status in the reformed High Council. The ceremony was held in the main hall of Conclave Prime, the same hall where, not long ago, the vote to erase human sovereignty had passed with 34 hands raised and barely a moment of doubt. The hall looked the same. The banners were the same. The lights still buzzed and shifted overhead. But the feeling in the room was different, and everyone who had been there for both events could feel the difference, even if they could not fully explain it. The Luminari elder stood at the center of the room in a simple, pale robe, her white shell catching the light. Beside her stood Amara Osi, straight and steady. The hall was full and very quiet. After the formal words were spoken, and the new seal of the Reformed High Council was unveiled, its design including the Luminari sigil for the first time in 600 years of galactic governance, a young Luminari, who had come with the Elder's delegation, moved close to the old female. He was young enough that his shell was still bright gold. He had wide, curious eyes, and the kind of restless energy that the very young carry before life teaches them to be still. He looked up at the Elder and asked, in a voice just above a whisper, "How did you know? How did you know 200 years ago that humanity would be different, that they would not become like the ones who hurt them?" The Elder looked at him. She was quiet for a moment, the way very old beings are quiet, not because they do not have an answer, but because they are choosing which part of a long answer to give to a young person who is only ready for a small piece of it. Then she looked out at the stars visible through the great transparent wall of the chamber. The same stars she had watched during the first vote, when everyone else was celebrating, and she had been waiting. "Because they never stopped building," she said softly. "For 200 years, alone in the dark, behind a wall they did not build and did not deserve, they kept working. They kept reaching." Her pale eyes were steady and calm. Everything they built to come home. The young Luminari followed her gaze to the stars. Somewhere out there, in the deep dark between the lights, 12 ships that cast no shadow and left no trace moved in long, slow arcs through the invisible web of the universe. Silent, patient, present, watching over a galaxy that was very slowly learning to be better.